Good morning from a ride to LA. Right? I mean, both of you are in Los Angeles.
That is correct.
Yes.
So, good morning, Dr. Rick Boxer and Lou Weisbach. Lou, I know for several years since I was thinking of doing a conference in Chicago, and I did my research on who's who in Chicago and who I should meet. And Lou's name came from several directions as somebody that should get involved. And indeed, I managed to get a meeting with Lou at some point several years ago, and since then we're in touch. And since then, we've built a very successful conference in Chicago, which I'm very proud of. And Lou reached out to me just a couple of weeks ago saying, hey, you know what, we're working on something amazing right now that the world should know about. Can we do a quick session and let the world know about it next week? And I was like, we normally need several months to do this. But here we are. So Lou and Rick and Dr. Boxer are here with us. And we will talk about a fully funded, mission-based, public-private partnership that the idea is to prevent and or eradicate the 15 major diseases that plague Americans and the world, which is a very big thing to deal with, right? You guys are basically aiming to solve our biggest problems ever. This includes, but is not limited to abetes, Parkinson's, Alzheimer, heart diseases, and many other forms of cancer. The ACC was co-founded by Lou and Dr. Boxer, and they'll talk about it in a second. Just a couple of words about our speakers today. So Lou, as an entrepreneur, really, a former founder and CEO of publicly traded Halo Industries, which he led for 27 years. After building his fortune, Lou became involved in national political campaigns and fundraising, including a stint as the chair of the Jefferson Trust of the Democratic National Committee. Lou served as the director of preventions and cures initiatives for cancer treatment centers of America. And that's really just shortening a very large and long bio. So Dr. Boxer is a distinguished UCLA clinical professor of urology and three-time cancer survivor. President Biden appointed him to the National Cancer Advisory Board. The National Cancer Advisory Board will complement the Cancer Moonshot, which President Biden reignited a year ago to end cancer as we know it today, including by making sure his administration is investing in research and development that will help breakthroughs to prevent, detect, and treat diseases like cancer. Rick and Lou are already lining up leaders of companies, sporting organizations, including MLB, civil servants, and politicians on both sides of the aisle to spread the good word about the American Center for Cures, or the ACC as they've named. So wow. So this is a very big deal that aims to solve humanity's biggest issues outside of Russia and Celine Dion. But no, that's a stupid joke. But really seriously solving huge issues. And I will let you, Lou, take the discussion forward. But maybe just to ask you, how did you end up doing this? I mean, you're an entrepreneur. You built a company from scratch. And I'll just ask an opening question, and then I'll let you take it from here.
Of course.
What brought you to this?
Well, I think certainly in my life, and I'm assuming in many of the people that are on this call, once we've kind of accomplished what we needed to accomplish in life from a career perspective, we want to try to do things that are legacy items and things that really change the world in a positive way. And all of us, as we move on in our careers, have greater connectivity every day. And you, by the way, Denny, are a perfect example of that. Every year and every day, you know more people, right? And because you're the type of person you are, when you pick up the phone to call people, everybody welcomes you because you are a decent man and have a great reputation. And so people will do whatever you want them to do within reason. And I decided that I wanted to do something that would really change the world in a positive way. And I was blessed to meet Rick about 25 years ago. And he's been my partner in crime ever since, not only in these types of works, but all kinds of crimes. He's just a great human being and a great friend. And so we realized that the not just America, but the world has the wrong process relative to disease, and that we don't treat disease in a business way. It's nobody's job. Think of anything else that the people on this call have worked on in their lives. It's nobody's job to cure anything. In other words, if Alzheimer's isn't cured in the next 25 years, nobody's going to lose their job. There's no time pressure on anybody. There's no major investment. Everybody's running around to raise money, but it never gets done, and it never will get done. And so we said to ourselves, what could we put together that will bring the funding to get it done, will be in the private sector, where we'll take the most brilliant American business leaders who know how to get jobs done, in charge and accountable and responsible. And if they don't get it done within a prescribed period of time, they're going to get fired. We want to light a fire under people and give them the wherewithal to get this accomplished. So that was the original thought that Rick and I had. And we had a bill in Congress many, many years ago. It went nowhere. The reception that we had, and by the way, the bill was co-sponsored by Joe Lieberman, Kay Bailey Hutchinson, Thad Cochran, and Tom Carper. But there were a lot of special interests that were opposed to it, and it literally went nowhere. But the people that were involved with it in those days, many of them, including household names to all of you, subsequently in their lives, they had disastrous things that happened to them with disease, including one of the lead sponsors whose wife got Alzheimer's, and she's suffered desperately for the last 6 years and is dying. And I can tell you 100 of these stories. So this time around, people are looking at it from a different perspective. And they realize that disease is used as a punchline for and a line of convenience to raise money by politicians, but there's no real plan and there's no real mission to get it done. And not to knock anybody, but we have a moonshot for cancer, and it's really not funded. Well, how do you go to the moon without funding? I don't think you could. And so we came up with a concept that will literally cost the government nothing and will give every American, because disease is something that I guarantee you everybody on the phone who I haven't met are dealing with something right now in their family, whether it's a father, themselves, a child, their best friend, their children. And we haven't done a particularly good job in terms of preventing or eradicating it. So what I would begin to tell you is, was that a long enough answer to your question?
No, that's very interesting. That's a very good opening to give us some background. And before I let you take over, and of course, if there'll be questions, I'll be here at the end of the discussion to discuss them with you. But Richard, you're a 3-time cancer survivor, which is crazy. 3-time cancer survivor. I guess that had its effect on you and your eagerness to say, enough is enough. We have to do something here about this.
Well, that's certainly true, and it is crazy, and that's probably why I've hooked up with this guy on the other screen. But I had in the last 25 years, I've had the experience of 3 different malignancies, and thankfully, because of the scientists and pharmaceutical industry, I was able to be treated and cured of the disease, which included surgery, chemotherapy, and a bone marrow transplant. And it reminds me a little bit of what many of us still may remember, and that is when Bill Clinton used to be very emotional, bite his lip and say, I feel your pain. Well, actually, I've had the pain, and I can identify with the individuals, the patients who presently have or had, or maybe in the future, unfortunately, may have a malignancy. But also, it affects the way I've treated patients. I've been a clinician for over 40 years, and so I have the experience of knowing what it is to be a patient and to be a caregiver, and also because of various experiences I've had throughout my life, I've also understand the policy working at the highest levels in the U.S. government, and being on the board of directors of National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Institute and National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive, and Kidney Diseases. So I come from this from various different directions, including private practice and academic medicine. So I really have all I've had all the opportunities and experiences of having both being both sides of the bed, as it were, and hearing that I have the disease, and unfortunately having to tell people that they have a disease. And it seems to me that at this point in this juncture, there is an opportunity to use the science and the and technology, but also the experience of people who are entrepreneurs who can identify a problem, develop a product, market that product, and get it to the public. And so the time is now to actually approach diseases, and we don't have the arrogance to choose which particular disease. Those will be chosen by a group of extraordinarily distinguished people who can identify what is at the cusp of treatment, or better yet, prevention, and then attack those first. So I've had experiences which I want to use for the good of all people.
Amazing. So what I'll do now is I'll let Lou lead the discussion. I'm here with you. I'll just go and
thank you, Danny,
for a minute, and I'll be back soon to see if we have any other questions. And thank you.
I appreciate it. First of all, do you see the difficulty that I have in trying to speak about this issue when I've got to compete with him? I mean, it's really very challenging. But what I thought I would just kind of, for your viewers, go through the business elements of this, and frankly the compelling fact pattern from a business perspective, and then Rick, I think, can speak about the scientific issues. So the plan that we put together, Tom Price, the Secretary of Health under Donald Trump, said that he believes that this effort will rival the greatest accomplishment ever in the history of America. The fact that Rick Boxer was named to the National Cancer Advisory Board by President Biden recently, the fact that when we do Zoom meetings like the one today, we haven't had one negative from anybody, and people get off the phone and the call, as I'm sure all of you will today, and say, just tell me what I can do to help. Because we believe that this plan is bulletproof and is a plan that we're not going to ask the government to do, but we're going to demand the government do it. And to have this go on for as long as it has and not get resolved, we are putting our feet in the sand and drawing a line in the sand, and we're not going to stop until this gets accomplished. So one thing about disease, we're all frustrated with healthcare in this country. We're even more frustrated probably with our political leaders on both sides of the aisle, not getting along and fighting openly, publicly and openly, and not getting our work done. At the end of the day, they work for us. And that's why we are not going to allow them to not do this, we're going to tell them that unless they want to get a new job, they're going to do it. And that's from the White House through the entire Congress, because disease isn't black or white, and it's not rich or poor, and it's not Democrat or Republican, and it doesn't matter how much money Steve Jobs has. The fact that we've done a lousy job in this area is impacting everybody in this country in exactly the same way. So if we as a country can't get together around this issue, our political leaders have no chance to get together on anything. And we have built a plan here that, as I said, is bulletproof, where we're going to have the Fed sell $750 billion worth of bonds. The federal government annually will be responsible for the interest, which would have been a lot less a year ago, but it's going to be $30 to $35 billion a year. And that money will be made up for by the licensing of from products to pharmaceutical companies that aren't preventative and aren't cures. And so at the end of the day, this plan will cost the federal government nothing. And whatever we cure and prevent will end up saving the federal government trillions of dollars annually, and most importantly, growing. So the plan is to go after, have 15 centers. 14 centers will be again around specific diseases. To Rick's point, that's going to be a panel that'll make those decisions, but they certainly will include Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, diabetes, breast cancer, prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer. You can kind of guess, and mental illness, by the way, as well. And the 15th group will be the combination of orphan diseases and every other disease that we don't have a single group working on. So we want the American public to know whatever they find out about from their doctor for themselves or their child, that we have a plan, we have a mission, we have enough money, we have a CEO who's accountable and responsible to cross the finish line, and they've got the funding. We don't have to beg Congress every year, but they have the money to get the job done. This should have happened 30 years ago. The members of Congress now who did not support the bill many years ago have now understand what we were telling them. And now we have total buy-in from everybody. And frankly, as it should be. So it's exciting to us. We think we're going to be able to change the world, but we need people like all of you to be supportive and help us in any way that you can possibly. If some of you run public companies, we're talking about putting out press releases in support of this, holding press conferences in support of this, contacting your congressmen and your senators as well, contacting the White House. There's going to be a lot of national media coming out starting in the next couple of days. We're talking to CNN. We're talking to everybody. We've held back doing media, but we expect this to begin within the next week. And we think there's going to be a movement because, and I always like to use this as an example, I'm guessing virtually everybody on this call knows who Damar Hamlin is. Damar Hamlin is the football player that got injured and almost died on national television. And there were probably 10,000 Americans that knew his name. And now there are 320 million Americans that know who he is and care about him. This issue is an issue that is important and essential in the lives of every single American. So there are no special interests here. This issue is about every person that's on this call and everybody that you ever talked about it. And we've got the solution, and it makes sense economically. It makes sense relative to giving hope to the hopeless and having a real process. And I'll tell you a quick story. When people heard about this in Los Angeles a few weeks ago, I got a phone call from the leading cardiologist and his brother-in-law in Los Angeles, and they've had a business for 17 years, and they have a vaccine that none of you have heard about that theoretically, and this is still yet to be completed, will stop heart attacks. And they said to me, there's only one problem. The FDA needs 7 years of trials, requires it for this. And we need $500 million and we don't have it. And so when you start to think about that, and then you start to think about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and diabetes, and realize that we have no process in this country to get this done. There's nobody that's going to lose their job if we don't accomplish it. When in the business world, and I ran a public company, we were accountable and responsible. We had quarterly estimates, and if we didn't make them, we paid a big penalty. There is no such thing in healthcare in this country. There is no big penalty to be paid if we don't wipe out breast cancer or Parkinson's. And yet, if you'd be very hard put to make a case that we could wipe out polio 65 years ago, and that we can't either prevent or cure some of the diseases that plague us. So as we've been going around the country over the last 6 weeks and presenting it, as I said, there hasn't been one person, not one special interest group that has been negative. And we believe that there will be 340 million people in this country that are going to be supportive. Yes, there'll be some outliers, but we have told people in Congress that if you stand up in the way of this, you're going to be looking for a new job, because it's about you and your family, and it's not a position you want to take. So that's the financial side of it, the political side of it. And Rick, if you don't mind, I'll turn it over to you relative to the scientific elements.
Before I start, Lou, why don't you explain the actual structure of it, that
Sure.
how it actually will function?
So the concept is there would be 15 separate entities in the private sector. So let's just take an example of Parkinson's. There'll be an organization. The most important thing we're all going to do, and this again, is, like Rick said before, is above our pay grade, is we'll choose the CEO that we have confidence is going to be able to get the job done. And we think of, for example, on prostate cancer, a guy like Mike Milken, as an example, who cares so much personally and has experienced this issue with himself, and let them decide how they want to go about their goal and objective of preventing or curing Parkinson's, as an example. And by the way, I've spoken to Michael J. Fox often about this, and he's a huge advocate. And the CEO then will decide, do I want to build a internal structure and build my own research team, or do I want to reach out to entities that already exist and give people challenges at UCLA or at Cedars-Sinai or in Miami, take people all around the world that have been doing work on Parkinson's and try and put the pieces together. Because part of this as a business leader is the problem is that it's nobody's job to put the pieces together. So we're going to leave it up to the CEO to decide how he or she wants to structure the business. But at the end of the day, they're going to be accountable and responsible to get the job done. But if you think of it this way also, what happens if you, God forbid, find out that you have Parkinson's tomorrow? Right now, you can kind of look online, you can talk to the Parkinson's Foundation, but the reality is you're not going to feel real good about it because we haven't made a serious stride in Parkinson's for 40 years. Now people are going to know that with certainty, we've got the money to get the job done. We've got the mission, the right people running it. And you'll be able to go to that center and say, okay, I've got this. What's the latest information that you have? What suggestions do you have for us? There's no place like that today. And we're going to have those places for every major disease. So that's the concept that we have. There's obviously more detail, which I'm happy to describe to any of you privately at any time. And we're also very happy to hear people's any solutions that you have or suggestions that you have as well. The one thing we're not going to tolerate is people who just stand up against it. If you think we're doing things in a way that should be different, we'd love to have that conversation. But if you politically want to just say, we're not supporting this, then we are going to point out exactly who you are and what the ultimate price that Americans are going to have to pay because of your inability to stand up and support something that will change the world for all Americans. The other point I would make is that isn't this who we want to be as Americans? Isn't this what we used to be when all of us were a lot younger and how we were viewed? And don't we as America want to be the country that's the exporter of good health and cures? Bless you, Ricky. So with that, Rick, do you want to take over?
Well, sure. I think that the best example of the science of the being at the precipice of cures, or better yet, prevention, is what happened with Operation Warp Speed. The That is that we were at a point with COVID that people were dying, like routinely, and unfortunately, some still do. But because of the commitment of the federal government to science that actually was already uh, available, that the scientists were able to quickly develop mRNA vaccines, and we were able to, within a few months, instead of what usually takes many, many years, to develop vaccines and use those vaccines, get them in arms, and then have people, hundreds of millions of people, and many, many more, even maybe billions in around the world, be inoculated, be vaccinated, and suddenly COVID is not completely in the rearview mirror, but it's certainly better than what we were looking at in February of 2020. And so what it demonstrated was that there was at the time, there was great science and answers to diseases on the shelf, but no one was actually taking them off the shelf and doing something with them. And so this idea is to not only discover new chemicals or compounds, or new surgical procedures, or new vaccines, but to but also to apply what is already available but is not being applied now. I remember having a conversation, 20 years ago, with at the time the National Cancer Centers, National Institutes of Health, and NCI director, and telling him about this idea. And he said, I wouldn't be surprised if we have 5 or 10 on the shelf right now that could cure diseases, but no one's looking at them, and we don't have the money to do so. We have people are interested, but there's not really the capability. One of the sad things about what goes on now is that there are young investigators who are basically turned away from science because they cannot get funding for their particular projects. What's called the pay line, that is, researchers submit to the National Institutes of Health various applications for research and development. Only maybe 80%, 20% are actually funded, maybe 25%. The other 75% are not funded. And who knows what those individuals would have been able to do, or where they'll go when they don't have the funding available. And so the opportunity of being able to have a well-funded and not being worried about annualized funding, that is, the money will be available in a pot, so to speak, and the centers will be fully funded and able to look into the future, and the future is really young investigators. So there's recently it was written in I think one of the national either New York Times or Washington Post, about when the brain really is fully developed, and the most creative times are between the 20s and 30s, and those are the times when great discoveries are made by young investigators. And it's terrible to have a situation where they're underfunded, where all of us could have gained from it. I personally stand on the shoulders of scientists who were able to develop the chemotherapy or the bone marrow transplant, whatever was necessary in order to have me here today. It's something that is obviously very close to my heart, but also I stand on the shoulders of those individuals who entered clinical trials, and clinical trials were able to maybe help those people, or maybe not, but they help future generations. That's our responsibility now, to help ourselves, but more importantly, our future generations. And we have the opportunity, we have the skill set, we have the knowledge, we have the desire. Now we need the political will. And if that can be accomplished, then I think that we will have a much brighter future.
Denny, I think we're happy to answer any questions that any of the viewers have.
Sure, I see. So one is not really a question. Someone here mentions this sounds like a great plan for humanity and the suffering that they had to go through despite having availability of funds and opportunities. I've been working in Africa and have realized that quality health is really an issue here. I do wish the USA Center, but would like to humbly request for your team to consider Africa a chance, to give Africa a chance, I think they meant, and set up at least few of your centers here. So that came from Rubina.
So,
yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you for your point. I will tell you that I'm very familiar with Africa, and I'm on the board of an organization that is building 10 new cities in Africa, whose purpose is to create a special environment for women that have been sex trafficked and brutalized. And so I'm very familiar with what's going on in Africa, and we're working with the African government. And so I'm not sure about the question of whether a center should be there, but certainly we should work cooperatively with the government in terms of taking what we come up with and exporting good health to the country, to be sure.
Thank you. That's the question, the remark that I had so far. So what are the chances this will become a reality, Lou? I mean, you guys need to get a lot of support, financial support, obviously. That's number one. And maybe my other question is, and maybe you mentioned it and I missed it. What about other countries in the world? Wouldn't they join such an effort to save humanity, really?
So I would say the odds of this are extraordinarily good, and the reason is because of what I mentioned before, that it's really, at the end of the day, not going to cost the government anything, and it's more an issue of how can we not do this. There's absolutely no rationale not to do this, zero, and we're not going to stop until it happens. And the extraordinarily good. I think when the American public, as they become aware of this in the next few weeks, I think they're going to demand it, as they should do. So we don't need to raise any money privately at all here, which is an important element. It's a simple process with the government at the end of the day. And I've told leaders of Congress who say, well, what about the debt ceiling and the cap and the problems we're having? And I said, you know what? This is about if there was ever an issue that could solve the debt ceiling issue, here's something that is in the interest of every American, and by the way, the interest of all people in the world, and will save us annually a boatload of money. There's no way that you can't do this. So I think it's going to happen, and I think there'll be a movement, and I think it'll be happen very quickly. And I don't think members of Congress are going to have a choice. And I don't think the White House will have a choice at the end of the day either. So I do think it's going to happen. And then the question is how do the other countries in the world get involved? I think they'll want to get involved for obvious reasons. Their own citizens are going to push them to do a complementary work with us. And so I think that this is going to, and by the way, think about what's going on right now with Russia, the Ukraine, China, Taiwan. What do we all have in common with all the people who live in those countries? They have the exact same issue. And so for our leaders to sit down with them on the one issue that we all have in common is really compelling, to sit down and try to work reasonably. And the Iranians, by the way, as well. So I think that this can be a uniting issue for the world, and can cure the world in a variety of ways, not just health-wise, but also from the perspective of us working together. So I'm very, very positive about this. I think it's going to happen. And the real reason I think it's going to happen is that it's in everybody's best interest. It makes sense. There's no economic reason for it not to happen. And the last piece I would add to it is that a lot of people, Rick has said some things prior on this call relative to the pharmaceutical industry and the great discoveries that they've done. And a lot of people think the pharmaceutical industry would be an obstacle to this because it would hurt their business at the end of the day. We have purposely structured this in a way that is pro-pharmaceutical industry, that we're going to be spending $750 billion on research, and we're going to license to them whatever they want that isn't preventative and isn't a cure. So this is a big win for the pharmaceutical industry, not only in America, but in the world. So we think that we have figured out every constituency and that this is going to happen for all the right reasons.
Denny, to answer your question a little bit more directly relative to the centers, the United States has great scientists, but doesn't have a monopoly on brilliance, and so there are many great scientists, researchers, clinicians in Europe and Asia, in Australia, New Zealand, that we'd be very happy to have join with us. We will be identifying each of the centers, not we, but the centers will be identifying the great researchers and clinicians who have wonderful ideas. I mean, an example that was just published, I think, in the last 24, 48 hours in the New York Times was about a physician scientist in Colombia that discovered that there are inexplicably viruses that he's identified in brains of patients that have Alzheimer's. And he and a researcher in England have been researching this for decades, and no one's really believed them. Suddenly, people are starting to say, wait a minute, this actually is interesting. This is actually true. They couldn't get funded. They couldn't get anything. And now people are actually starting to say, this actually makes sense. There may be viruses that are causing the plaques that are causing Alzheimer's. It's similar story to the clinician who looked at people who were getting peptic ulcers, gastric ulcers, and people were getting their stomachs removed and nerves cut. And suddenly someone said, you know what? There's a bacteria that is causing gastric ulcers. And that person was initially, like whistling in the wind. And then people started saying, wait a minute, we better fund this guy. We better find out if it's true. And now there's a pill that can cure gastric ulcers, and all those operations and everything else is gone. All you need is a pill. And one other example is for the mRNA, the vaccines that I mentioned earlier. There was a researcher named Howard Temin who kept on saying, RNA to DNA is possible. That is the transfer of information. Everyone said that's not true. It has to be DNA to RNA. He was underfunded, and finally, people believed him. He got the Nobel Prize, and the point is that there are people, great researchers around the world, who have discovered different aspects of healthcare that need to be explored, but they're underfunded. And I believe that without having to worry about annual funding, having institutions that have a considerable amount of money that will be able to look into the future and say, we're going to really explore these opportunities, we will just have discoveries that will lead to cures.
So to further amplify the point that Rick just made, I got a phone call about a month ago from a group on the East Coast who has found that they can predict in people Alzheimer's 15 to 20 years before people actually get the onset of Alzheimer's. And they can do this through a simple blood test, because the brain secretes into your blood system something that makes it, they have found is an absolute, gives them absolute certainty that this person 15 to 20 years later will have Alzheimer's. There's so many interesting things like that, but these people called me and said, but we've gotten $9.3 million from the NIH. We have no money left. and what do we do now? And so to Rick's point, that's another perfect example. In the case of having the American Center for Cures, there would be no problem for them. They would get whatever they needed for us to get the answers to questions that we have. And this really, by the way, is not a difficult thing to understand. And it's so clear that it's what we should have done a long time ago. And this time we're going to make it happen. I would also add, Denny, one last thing. Feel free to pass along our contact information, certainly my contact information, if anybody wants to discuss things that they can do to help with this. But certainly connectivity with media, with politicians, with business leaders would be invaluable. And we're happy to share the basic information that we have about this in our website. So all of you on this call could be helpful in a dynamic way.
Now, there's a question here. How will you ensure that solutions and cures make their way to the poor? We see how state governors have tremendous influence on what is instituted in their states and what is delivered to whom.
That's one of
that's built into.
I was going to say that's one of the great cruelties of American healthcare, which is that people read about or hear about discoveries, but because it is not available to them based on insurance or really insurance, that they not only they learn about hope and the hope is dashed. That's really cruel. And it's always been said that American healthcare is the best money can buy, but the problem is there's just not enough money. And so what the goal of the discoveries is that because it's funded through the federal government as other research, and by the way, we are not in any way trying to eliminate the research monies that are available for the NIH. This is an add-on, not instead of. And so because we're great advocates of the basic science research that's being done there, but to add to the importance of everyone having it available, that it will be one of the precepts of the ACC, which is that once discovery is made, once the drug, let's just say, or the vaccine is available, then it's going to be available to all Americans. In fact, we want to make it around the world, but that'll be an issue with the other countries.
Lou, you wanted to say something.
Ricky's right on point. Yeah, I was going to say Ricky's right on point about that. The way I would think about it, Denny, is that this science, at the end of the day, is owned equally by every American citizen. And if somebody has Parkinson's, for example, whatever we come up with will be theirs, whether they're rich or poor. Makes no difference, and they'll have immediate access. And it will not, and at no cost.
And maybe I'll ask, how come now is the time? Why something like this didn't happen 5 years ago, 10 years ago? I mean,
well, the reason is we tried to make it happen 14 years ago, and there was no appetite for it. And then as people thought through what we tried to do then and realized that the things that they've encountered since then might not even exist today. So I spoke, for example, yesterday with one of the heads of CNN, and they said to me, if you had been successful 14 years ago with the bill, would my mother have died? And I said, and I know her mother well. And I said, there's a good chance no. And so when you think of it as a business person instead of a scientist, it just makes no sense as a business person that we could cure the things, including smallpox, including polio, 65 years ago on polio, and with the technology we have today, that we can't wipe out some of these diseases. Of course we could, but there's no process to do it. There's no accountability. There's no responsibility. There's no money, and nobody's going to lose their job. I mean, how do the greatest things that have ever happened in America occur? They occur because people are incentivized and have the financial wherewithal to get things done. Well, we haven't done that in science. And we haven't done that with diseases. We're going to do that now.
That's amazing.
Part of it is, Denny, also part of it is that there's been a realization that with the absolute laser focus of the Operation Warp Speed, it's a perfect demonstration of what can happen if everyone puts their mind together and funds research, and within a few months there's a vaccine. So if you apply that to other diseases, it makes sense now that people realize it can be done, and therefore it's very much worth trying.
And I think, Lou, you're absolutely right. I mean, when you see, unfortunately, when it hits, I mean, all of us have unfortunately have a first relative that suffered from Alzheimer or cancer, and when you see, cellular institutions that are solving or trying to solve a specific disease, run by billionaires. Let's say you're a billionaire that lost his son or his wife to something, then they devote their life sometimes and cash to support and cure, but it's not enough. Even $1 billion you pour in is just not enough. And so you have all these, and I've seen it throughout my work in the family office space, many groups that he suffered from, I don't know what kind of disease that is uncurable. Fox, Michael J. Fox is trying to solve, his issue. Of course, they all should do that. That's blessed, and it's good that they have means to influence and money, but they are on their own. So they would never, what you're talking about is an aggregate effort that needs to be done to really make a change, right?
So Michael's a perfect example. Michael, I met with him 14 years ago. He hugged me. He cried. He's the most wonderful human being, and to watch him suffer like he's suffered. And when we asked him to be a spokesperson at that time, and the Parkinson's Foundation told him that he shouldn't be because we don't want to upset the federal government, and we might lose funding that we already have in place if you speak up about a different plan, or money goes in a different direction, and we don't want you doing that. I mean, how ridiculous is that? And so now, 14 years later, we haven't done a thing for Parkinson's of any great significance. Michael, if you see him today compared to then, has suffered dramatically, and he's a wonderful human being, and this potentially could have been resolved. So this is an inexcusable period. And the other thing is even in the disease groups that we're talking about, I'm sure a lot of them are very good people, but they're businesses as well, and they have different motivations to some degree. There shouldn't be, the only motivation should be to cure, period, prevent or cure, period, and they should be rewarded for that. But to keep pouring money into operations that don't help at all and solve any problems is insanity.
Yeah, Lou, it's brilliant that you're in a position now that you're willing to take the time, effort, you and Richard, to make a change that others that are not incentivized enough wouldn't. And I thought whether I should share it or not, but you know what the heck. So obviously, it hurts everybody, everybody. So it's not like to say one is better, worse than the other. But when before I did all of that, I used to be a ground steward in El Al Airlines, and I remember I met this lady here. Her name was Orit, and she became a very, very successful VC partner. She built a VC and was involved in many visions and ventures, and she was a crazy energy ball. Like, she walks into the room, not only does she look very representative, but she was always happy and smiling and energy and doing stuff, and in Israel, and it's even all I'm saying is it's even more crazy when you see somebody like that, not someone who's older dies from cancer, which she passed 2 years ago. We were not in touch that much, but we knew each other. It was just like, holy hell. I mean, but of course, that's just one example of many others. And yeah, I mean, I hope you'll be successful with what you're doing. And we will share this. I will put it on our YouTube and I will share it with our network. I'll do a post about it on LinkedIn as well. Yeah, I will just before I let you see if you have anything else to add, I will just say to our group here that this month we have 3 conferences coming up. So on March 20th is our Houston conference. 2 days later, on the 22nd, is our Dallas conference. And a week later, on the 29th, is our New York conference. And we have amazing names from Rockefeller to Mattress Mac to Carol Levine. Oh, she's from your town, Lou, from Chicago, that sold Alberto Culver to Unilever for, I think, almost $4 billion. So lots is happening with us here this month. And I hope to see some of you with us in person. Anything else you'd like to add at this point, Lou or Richard?
The last thing I would say is that we welcome the help of everybody that's on this call in any way that you possibly can. Feel free to reach out to me anytime you'd like. But we're not doing this we're doing this for everybody. All of your families are dealing with the same thing that we're dealing with, and we welcome your help and support, and we would like you to reach out to as many people as you can that can influence this. Ricky, anything?
No, I just want to thank everyone for their time. And Lou and I are going to work tirelessly for this opportunity. We hope to have any one of you or all of you join in the effort. It's not money we're asking for. It's just your support, your emotional and intellectual support. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Good luck with that. And I hope
Denny, thank you.
Next time,
thank you very much.
I hope next time I'll see you at our conference talking about how this is moving forward.
We look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.